Neve had exactly 3 minutes to escape before they came looking for her. She gathered the heavy skirts of her ceremonial gown and ran down the corridor, her bare feet silent against the cold stone floor. The white silk tangled around her legs with every step, threatening to send her sprawling, but she did not slow down. She could not slow down. In less than an hour, she would be bound to Lord Cassius Blackthorne for the rest of her life, and she would rather die than let that happen. The sounds of the celebration echoed behind her, music and laughter drifting through the halls of her family's estate. 300 guests had gathered to witness the mating ceremony, nobles and merchants and pack leaders from across the realm. Her father had spent a fortune on flowers and wine, and a gown that cost more than most families earned in a year. He had told everyone that his eldest daughter was making a brilliant match, that Lord Blackthorne was a man of power and influence who would elevate their family to new heights. He had not told them that Lord Blackthorne was 40 years her senior. He had not told them about the 3 wives who had died under mysterious circumstances, or the servants who whispered about screams echoing from his chambers at night. He had not told them that Neve had begged on her knees not to be sold to a monster, and that he had backhanded her across the face and told her to be grateful anyone wanted her at all. So Neve ran. She had planned this for weeks, hiding coins in her mattress and mapping the servants' passages that wound through the estate. She knew exactly which door led to the stables, exactly which horse was fast enough to carry her to the border before anyone realized she was gone. All she had to do was reach the east wing, slip through the kitchens, and disappear into the night. She rounded a corner and slammed directly into a wall of solid muscle. Strong hands caught her arms before she could fall, steadying her with a grip that was firm, but surprisingly gentle. Neve's heart seized with terror. She had been caught. Her father would drag her back to the ceremony, and Lord Blackthorne would make her pay for this humiliation for the rest of her miserable life. She looked up, ready to beg, ready to fight, ready to do whatever it took to escape. The words died in her throat. The man before her was not her father, not a guard, not anyone she recognized. He was tall and powerfully built, with shoulders that blocked the corridor behind him and arms that looked capable of crushing bone. His hair was the deep brown of autumn leaves, swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and hard lines. A thin scar bisected his left eyebrow, giving him a dangerous edge that made something flutter low in Neve's stomach. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. They were gold, bright, and burning like molten metal, and they watched her with an intensity that made her feel like prey. "Going somewhere?" His voice was deep and rough, edged with something that might have been amusement. Neve tried to wrench herself free, but his grip did not budge. "Let me go. Please. I have to get out of here." In a ceremonial gown, with no shoes? One dark eyebrow arched upward. "You will not make it far." "I will make it far enough." She twisted again, desperation clawing at her chest. "Please, you do not understand. I cannot go back there. I cannot marry him." The amusement faded from the stranger's face, replaced by something sharper. His golden eyes swept over her, taking in the tears streaking her cheeks, the bruise she had tried to hide beneath powder on her jaw, the way her hands trembled in his grasp. "Who?" he asked, and the single word carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. "Lord Blackthorne." The name tasted like poison on her tongue. "My father arranged it. I tried to refuse, but he would not listen. No one listens. They just keep telling me how lucky I am, how grateful I should be, while they hand me over to a man who has buried 3 wives already." Something dangerous flickered in those golden eyes. The stranger's jaw tightened, and his grip on her arms shifted, softening into something almost protective. "Cassius Blackthorne," he repeated slowly. "The lord who rules the southern territories." "You know him?" "I know of him." The stranger's voice had gone cold, cold enough to make Neve shiver. "I know what kind of man he is." and I know that you are right to run." Hope sparked in Neve's chest, fragile and desperate. "Then let me go. Please, help me escape, and I will find a way to repay you. I will do anything." The stranger studied her for a long moment, his golden eyes searching her face as if looking for something hidden beneath the surface. Then he released her arms and stepped back, and Neve thought for one wild moment that he was going to let her pass. Instead, he shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm and smelled of pine and wood smoke, and it was so large it hung past her knees. "You cannot run," he said. "Not like this. Blackthorn has men watching every exit. The moment you step outside, they will catch you and drag you back." Neve's hope crumbled to ash. "Then what am I supposed to do?" The stranger smiled, and the expression transformed his face from dangerous to devastating. "You are going to walk back into that ceremony on my arm. And when the priest asks if anyone objects to this union, I am going to tell them that you are already claimed." Neve's heart stuttered. "Claimed? By whom?" The stranger leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear, and spoke 3 words that changed everything. "By me, your mate." He straightened, and Neve saw the silver chain around his neck for the first time. The pendant that hung from it bore a crest she recognized from every history book and royal decree she had ever seen. The wolf beneath the crown, the symbol of the Alpha King. "Who are you?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. His golden eyes gleamed. "Ronan Valamont, and you, little wolf, are about to become my queen." The ceremony hall fell silent the moment they walked through the doors. Neve felt 300 pairs of eyes fix upon her, felt the weight of their shock and confusion pressing against her skin. She had been gone for less than 10 minutes, but in that time, the careful order of the evening had shattered. Servants whispered in corners. Her mother stood frozen beside the altar, her face pale as milk. Lord Blackthorn waited at the front of the room, his cold eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of his intended bride on the arm of another man. And what a man! Ronan walked beside her with the easy confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in his life. His hand rested at the small of her back, warm and steady, and the crowd parted before them like water before a blade. He had not told her what to do, had not explained his plan beyond those 3 devastating words. He had simply offered his arm, and Neve had taken it, because the alternative was returning to Lord Blackthorn's side. Her father pushed through the crowd, his face mottled with fury. "Neve, what is the meaning of this? Where have you been? And who is this?" He stopped short as Ronan turned to face him. Neve watched the blood drain from her father's cheeks, watched recognition dawn in his eyes. Whatever bluster he had been about to unleash died in his throat. "Lord Ashford." Ronan's voice was pleasant, almost friendly, but there was steel beneath the silk. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding your daughter's betrothal." "Your Majesty." Her father's voice came out strangled. He dropped into a bow so deep his forehead nearly touched the floor. "I had no idea you would be attending. If I had known, I would have—" "You would have what? Postponed selling your daughter to a murderer?" Ronan's golden eyes swept across the room, taking in the frozen guests, the trembling servants, the priest clutching his ceremonial book like a shield. "Lord Blackthorn, step forward." The crowd shifted, and Neve saw Blackthorn for the first time since she had fled. He was tall and thin, with silver hair slicked back from a face that might have been handsome once, but had long since turned cruel. His pale eyes moved from Ronan to Neve and back again, calculating, assessing. "Your Majesty," Blackthorn said smoothly. "What a pleasant surprise. I was not aware you had business in this territory." "My business is wherever I choose it to be." Ronan pulled Neve closer, his arm wrapping around her waist in a gesture that was unmistakably possessive. "And tonight, my business is with you." Blackthorn's smile did not waver, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "I see. And does this business have anything to do with my bride? She is not your bride, Ronan's voice hardened. She is mine. She has been mine since the moment she was born. I have simply come to collect her. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Neve felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the heat of Ronan's body seeping through his coat into her skin. She did not understand what was happening, did not understand how the Alpha King could possibly be claiming her as his mate. They had never met before tonight. There was no bond between them, no recognition, no spark of destiny. And yet, when he had caught her in the corridor, when his hands had wrapped around her arms, she had felt something, a flicker of warmth in her chest, a stirring deep inside her, in a place she had not known existed. She had assumed it was fear or desperation, or the simple animal relief of finding an ally. Now she was not so sure. "That is an extraordinary claim," Blackthorn said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Do you have proof? The girl was promised to me 6 months ago. Contracts were signed. Gold was exchanged. I have legal right to her." "You have nothing." Ronan released Neve long enough to reach into his coat and withdraw a folded document bearing a royal seal. "This is a decree from the High Council, declaring any arrangement made for Lady Neve Ashford null and void. As my fated mate, she is under the protection of the Crown. Any attempt to claim her by force will be considered an act of treason." The hall erupted into whispers. Neve stared at the document, her mind reeling. He had come prepared. He had known about the ceremony, known about Blackthorn, known about her. This was not a chance encounter. This was a rescue mission. But why? Why would the Alpha King cross the realm to save a woman he had never met? Blackthorn's mask finally cracked. Rage twisted his features, ugly and raw, and for one terrible moment, Neve saw exactly what he was beneath the polished exterior. A predator. A killer. A monster who had destroyed 3 women and had planned to destroy her next. "This is not over," he snarled. "That girl belongs to me. I will not be humiliated in front of the entire nobility by some jumped-up king with a piece of paper." Ronan smiled, and the expression was terrifying. "Then consider this your formal humiliation. Guards." 2 men in royal armor stepped forward from the crowd, materializing as if from thin air. They flanked Blackthorn before he could move, their hands on the hilts of their swords. "Lord Blackthorn," Ronan said, his voice carrying through the silent hall, "you are hereby stripped of your titles and lands pending investigation into the deaths of your 3 previous wives. You will be escorted to the capital to face the king's justice." Blackthorn opened his mouth to protest, but the guards were already dragging him toward the door. His curses echoed through the hall until the heavy doors slammed shut behind him, cutting off the sound. Neve stood frozen, Ronan's coat still wrapped around her shoulders, her bare feet cold against the marble floor. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then Ronan turned to face her, and his golden eyes softened into something almost gentle. "Come," he said, offering his hand. "We have much to discuss, and I believe you deserve some answers." She took his hand, because she had no other choice. But as his fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and impossibly real, Neve could not shake the feeling that she had traded one cage for another. The royal carriage was waiting outside, black and silver and drawn by 4 horses whose coats gleamed like obsidian in the moonlight. Ronan helped her inside without a word, his hand lingering at her elbow as she climbed the steps. The interior was lined with velvet cushions and smelled of leather and sandalwood, and Neve sank into the softness with a shudder of relief. Her legs ached from standing in that ceremony hall for hours. Her feet were numb from the cold stone floors. Her mind was a storm of questions she did not know how to ask. Ronan settled onto the seat across from her and rapped his knuckles against the roof. The carriage lurched into motion, carrying them away from her father's estate and the nightmare she had nearly been forced to live. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Neve studied him in the flickering lamplight, trying to reconcile the terrifying king who had humiliated Lord Blackthorn with the man who had wrapped his coat around her shoulders and offered her his hand like she was something precious. "Ask," he said finally. "I can see the questions burning behind your eyes." Neve straightened in her seat. "How did you know? About the ceremony, about Blackthorn, about me? You said you came to collect me. What does that mean?" Ronan was silent for a moment, his golden eyes fixed on her face. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she had expected. 3 months ago, I received a letter from one of my informants in the Southern Territories. It contained rumors about Lord Blackthorn's treatment of his previous wives, evidence that their deaths were not accidents but murders carefully disguised. His jaw tightened. I began an investigation. During that investigation, I learned that he had secured a new bride, a young noblewoman named Neve Ashford, who had reportedly begged her father not to sell her to a monster. Neve's throat constricted. Someone had heard her. Someone had cared enough to tell. "I could not allow another innocent woman to fall into his hands," Ronan continued. "I obtained the council decree and traveled here to stop the ceremony. I intended to claim you as a ward of the crown, someone under my protection until the investigation was complete." He paused, and something flickered in his expression. "But then I walked into that hall and caught your scent, and everything changed." "My scent?" Neve frowned. "What do you mean?" Ronan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, and the intensity of his gaze made her press back against the cushions. "I mean that the moment I stepped through those doors, my wolf recognized you. It knew you before I ever saw your face, before I ever heard your voice. You are my mate, Neve, my true mate, destined by the moon goddess herself. I was not lying when I made that claim in front of your father." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything Neve thought she understood. True mates were rare, almost mythical. Most wolves went their entire lives without finding theirs. The idea that the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the realm, had found his in her seemed impossible. "I do not feel anything," she said, her voice smaller than she intended. "When you touch me, I feel warmth, but not— I do not know what I am supposed to feel." "You will." Ronan's voice softened. "The bond takes time to fully form. Your wolf has been dormant, likely suppressed by years of fear and survival. But she is there, Neve. I can sense her, waiting to wake." Neve wrapped his coat tighter around herself, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to the fabric. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she was more than just a pawn to be traded between powerful men. "And if I do not want this?" she asked quietly. "If I do not want to be your queen, your mate, any of it? What happens then?" Something vulnerable flickered across Ronan's face, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Then I take you somewhere safe and ensure that no one can ever hurt you again. I will not force you into anything, Neve. I am not Blackthorn." "You claimed me in front of 300 people," Neve pointed out. "You announced to the entire realm that I belong to you. I claimed you to save your life." His voice roughened with an emotion she could not name. "Every word I spoke was true, but I would have spoken lies if it meant keeping you out of that monster's hands. I have no intention of trapping you in a bond you do not want." Neve studied him for a long moment, searching for the deception, the manipulation, the hidden cruelty she had learned to expect from the men in her life. She found none. She found only a king who looked at her like she was something precious, something worth crossing a kingdom to save. "Why?" she whispered. "Even before you knew I was your mate. Why did you care what happened to some lord's daughter you had never met?" Ronan's gaze dropped to his hands, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "Because I know what it is to be powerless. I know what it is to watch someone you love be destroyed by a monster while the world looks away." He swallowed hard. My sister. She was betrothed to a lord much like Blackthorn when she was barely 16. By the time I was old enough to stop it, she was already gone. I could not save her. But I swore on her grave that I would never let another woman suffer the same fate if it was within my power to prevent it. Tears burned in Neve's eyes. She reached across the space between them and took his hand, an impulse she did not fully understand. His fingers curled around hers, warm and rough, and something in her chest unclenched. "I am sorry," she said softly, "about your sister." Her name was Alara. His voice cracked on the word. "She would have liked you, I think. She had the same fire in her eyes." The carriage rolled on through the darkness, and Neve did not let go of his hand. Perhaps this cage had a door after all. The palace appeared on the horizon just as dawn began to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Neve had dozed off somewhere during the night, lulled by the rocking of the carriage and the exhaustion that had finally caught up with her. She woke with her head resting against something warm and solid, and it took her a moment to realize she had fallen asleep against Ronan's shoulder. He had moved to sit beside her at some point, his arm curved protectively around her waist, and she was pressed against his side like it was the most natural thing in the world. She should have pulled away. She should have put distance between them, reminded herself that she barely knew this man, that trust was a luxury she could not afford. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was and watched the palace grow larger through the carriage window. It was beautiful. Towers of white stone rose toward the sky, their spires glittering in the early morning light. Gardens sprawled across the grounds, still green despite the approaching winter, and a river wound through the property like a silver ribbon. It looked like something from a fairy tale, a castle where princesses lived happily ever after. Neve had stopped believing in fairy tales a long time ago. "Welcome home," Ronan murmured, his voice rough with sleep, "or what I hope will become your home in time." She sat up slowly, instantly missing his warmth. "It is beautiful. My mother designed the gardens." He nodded toward the sprawling greenery below. "She spent years cultivating them, planting flowers from every corner of the realm. When she died, I almost let them go wild. It felt wrong to tend them without her." His voice softened. "But then I realized that letting them die would be like losing her all over again, so I kept them alive. For her." Neve turned to look at him, seeing past the crown and the power to the man beneath. He had lost so much, his sister, his mother, and yet he had not let grief turn him bitter or cruel. He had used his pain to protect others, to build something worth preserving. "You loved her very much," she said quietly. "More than anything." Ronan met her gaze, and the rawness in his golden eyes stole her breath. "She taught me what it meant to be a good king, not through strength or conquest, but through compassion. She said that true power lies in lifting others up, not in grinding them beneath your heel." The carriage rolled to a stop, and servants materialized to open the doors and help them down. Neve stepped onto solid ground for the first time in hours, her bare feet sinking into soft grass. Someone had laid a path of velvet cushions from the carriage to the palace entrance, she realized, so she would not have to walk on cold stone. She looked at Ronan, a question in her eyes. "I sent word ahead," he said simply. "I wanted you to be comfortable." Something warm bloomed in Neve's chest. She had spent her entire life being treated as an afterthought, a burden to be managed rather than a person to be cared for. The simple kindness of velvet cushions beneath her feet nearly undid her. The days that followed passed in a blur of new experiences. Ronan gave her a suite of rooms in the eastern wing, with tall windows overlooking the gardens, and a bed so soft she sank into it like a cloud. He assigned her a lady's maid named Petra, a cheerful young woman who chattered endlessly about palace gossip and never once looked at Neve with pity or judgment. He took her on tours of the grounds, showing her the library and the kitchens and the secret courtyard where his mother's favorite roses still bloomed. And every evening, they dined together. At first, Neve was guarded. She answered his questions with careful, measured responses, revealing nothing that could be used against her. But Ronan was patient. He shared stories of his childhood, of pranks he had played on his tutors, and adventures he had undertaken with Alara before she was taken away. He made her laugh, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. He asked about her dreams, her fears, the books she loved, and the places she longed to see. Slowly, piece by piece, Neve began to share. She told him about her mother, who had died when Neve was young, leaving her alone with a father who had never wanted daughters. She told him about the years she had spent trying to earn his approval, excelling at every lesson and duty, only to realize that nothing she did would ever be enough. She told him about the night her father had announced her betrothal to Blackthorn, and how she had screamed and begged until he struck her into silence. Ronan listened to every word. He did not interrupt, did not offer empty platitudes. He simply sat with her pain, holding space for it, letting her know that she was heard. "You deserved better," he said when she finished, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "You deserved a family who cherished you." "I never had that." Neve stared at her hands folded in her lap. "I do not even know what it would feel like." Ronan reached across the table and lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Then let me show you," he said softly. "Let me give you the family you should have had." Neve's heart stumbled. She was not ready to call what she felt love, but it was close. It was dangerously, terrifyingly close. 2 weeks after her arrival, Ronan took her to the Moonlight Grove. It was a clearing deep in the palace gardens, hidden behind a wall of ancient oaks whose branches wove together overhead like a cathedral ceiling. Silver moonflowers bloomed along the edges, their petals glowing softly in the darkness, and a small pond reflected the stars above like a mirror of the night sky. "This is where my parents met," Ronan said, guiding her to a stone bench at the water's edge. "My father was a prince, and my mother was a healer's daughter. Their union was considered scandalous at the time. A future king, mated to a commoner." He smiled, a soft expression that made Neve's chest ache. But my father did not care. He said that when he saw her standing in this grove, picking moonflowers for her medicines, he knew she was the only woman he would ever love. Neve sank onto the bench, the cool stone seeping through her gown. "That is a beautiful story." "It is a true story." Ronan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. They were happy together, genuinely happy, until the day she died. I used to think that kind of love was unique to them, something I would never find for myself. He turned to face her, and the moonlight caught the gold of his eyes, making them glow like embers. "I do not think that anymore." Neve's breath caught. She knew what he was saying, knew what those words meant, but she could not quite bring herself to believe it. "Ronan," she whispered, "I know it has only been 2 weeks." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles against her palm. "I know you have every reason to be wary, to hold yourself back, to protect your heart from being hurt again. But I need you to know what you have done to me, Neve. I need you to understand." She should have pulled away. She should have reminded him that she was still broken, still healing, still learning how to exist without fear. Instead, she leaned closer, drawn by a force she could not resist. "Tell me," she breathed. Ronan cupped her face in his free hand, his touch featherlight against her cheek. "Before I found you, I was a shell. I wore the crown and played the king, but there was nothing inside me except duty and grief. I had convinced myself that I would never have what my parents had, that I would die alone on a throne built from obligation." His voice roughened, cracking at the edges. And then I walked into that ceremony hall and saw you trying to run, and something inside me woke up. Something that had been sleeping for so long I had forgotten it existed. Tears burned in Neve's eyes. She had spent so long believing she was worthless, a burden to be traded and discarded. The idea that she could be someone's awakening, someone's reason to hope, seemed impossible. I do not know how to do this, she admitted, her voice trembling. I do not know how to trust, how to let someone in. Every man who has ever had power over me has used it to hurt me. I am not every man. Ronan's golden eyes blazed with intensity. I am your mate, your partner, your equal. I will never use my power against you, Neve. I will only ever use it to protect you, to cherish you, to give you the life you deserve. She believed him. Despite every instinct screaming at her to be careful, despite every lesson she had learned about the cruelty of powerful men, she believed him. I am falling in love with you, she whispered. I think I have been falling since the moment you wrapped your coat around my shoulders and told me I deserved answers. Ronan exhaled sharply, as if he had been holding his breath for weeks. Neve? I am terrified, she continued, the words spilling out faster now. I am terrified that this is too good to be true, that something will happen to ruin it, that I will wake up and find myself back in that ceremony hall with Blackthorn's hand on my arm. But I am more terrified of never telling you how I feel, of letting fear steal something precious from me again. Ronan leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers, their breath mingling in the cool night air. You are the bravest person I have ever met, he murmured. Do you know that? After everything you have survived, you still have the courage to open your heart. That is not weakness, Neve. That is strength. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. His response was immediate and overwhelming. He pulled her into his arms, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressed flat against her back. He kissed her like he had been waiting his entire life for this moment, like she was the air he needed to breathe. Neve melted into him, her fingers gripping the front of his shirt, and something deep inside her finally clicked into place. Her wolf. She felt it stir for the first time, a warm presence unfurling in her chest like a flower opening to the sun. It pressed against her ribs, reaching for Ronan, recognizing him as its other half. The mate bond snapped into place between them, golden and bright, and Neve gasped against his lips at the intensity of it. I feel it, she breathed when they finally broke apart. I feel you. Ronan's smile was radiant, brighter than the moonflowers blooming around them. Welcome home, little wolf. He kissed her again, and the stars wheeled overhead, and Neve finally understood what it meant to belong. The messenger arrived 3 days later, pale-faced and trembling. Neve was in the library when Ronan found her, a book of poetry open in her lap. One look at his face told her something was terribly wrong. The warmth had drained from his golden eyes, replaced by cold fury that made her wolf whimper inside her chest. What happened? She asked, rising to her feet. Blackthorn has escaped. The words fell like stones. He was being transported to the capital for trial when his convoy was ambushed. Half my men are dead, and he has vanished. Neve's blood turned to ice. She had allowed herself to believe it was over, that the monster who had nearly claimed her was locked away forever. She should have known better. Men like Blackthorn did not stay caged for long. How? She whispered. Who helped him? Ronan's jaw tightened. My scouts tracked the attackers to your father's estate. Lord Ashford has been harboring Blackthorn's allies for weeks, funneling them gold and information. It appears he has not forgiven you for escaping his plans. The betrayal should not have surprised her. Her father had sold her once before. Of course he would sell her again if given the chance. But hearing it confirmed, knowing that the man who was supposed to protect her was actively working to destroy her, carved a fresh wound in her chest. He wants revenge, Neve said, her voice hollow. Blackthorn and my father both. They want to make me pay for embarrassing them. They will not touch you. Ronan crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, his grip fierce and protective. I will burn every stronghold they have before I let them lay a hand on you. But even as he held her, Neve felt the cold creep of fear sliding down her spine. Blackthorn was cunning. He had murdered 3 wives and convinced the world they were accidents. He would not come at them directly. He would find another way. The attack came that very night. Neve woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright in bed, her heart pounding, and saw orange light flickering beyond her window. The gardens were burning. Flames licked at the ancient oaks, consuming the moonlight grove where Ronan had first kissed her. Screams echoed through the palace corridors, mixed with the clash of steel and the howl of wolves. She was on her feet and running before she could think. She tore through the corridors in her nightgown, bare feet slapping against the stone, following the sounds of battle toward the great hall. Guards rushed past her, some heading toward the flames, others toward the main gates, where the fighting seemed thickest. She found Ronan in the entrance hall, surrounded by bodies. He was in his human form, blood streaming from a wound on his arm, a sword gripped in his white-knuckled fist. 3 men lay motionless at his feet, and 2 more circled him with weapons drawn. They wore the black and silver of Blackthorn's house, their faces twisted with murderous intent. "Ronan!" Neve screamed. He turned at the sound of her voice, and that momentary distraction cost him. One of the attackers lunged forward, blade aimed at Ronan's heart. Neve watched in horror as the sword drove toward him, too fast to block, too close to dodge. Something inside her shattered. Her wolf surged forward with a force that stole her breath. Pain ripped through her body as bones cracked and reformed, as her skin split and knitted back together. She had never shifted before, had never felt her wolf take physical form, but instinct guided her now. She landed on 4 paws, silver-white fur bristling, and threw herself between Ronan and the blade. The sword glanced off her shoulder instead of piercing his chest. She felt the bite of steel, the hot rush of blood, but the pain was distant, muffled by the roar of protective fury flooding her veins. She turned on the attacker with fangs bared and tore out his throat before he could raise his weapon again. The second attacker fled. Neve let him go, her entire focus narrowing to the man crumpled against the wall behind her. Ronan stared at her with wide eyes, shock and awe and desperate relief warring across his features. "Neve." She shifted back without meaning to, the transformation pulling her human form from the wolf like water through a sieve. She collapsed onto the blood-slicked floor, naked and shivering, the wound on her shoulder screaming with pain. Ronan caught her before she could fall completely, pulling her against his chest and wrapping his torn cloak around her body. "You shifted," he breathed against her hair. "You saved my life." "Of course I did." Her voice came out weak, thready. "You are my mate." Shouts echoed from deeper in the palace. The battle was still raging, but as Ronan lifted her into his arms and carried her toward safety, Neve felt something fierce and proud blooming in her chest despite the pain. She had spent her whole life being protected by others, controlled by others, told she was too weak to matter. Tonight, she had proven them all wrong. The healers kept Neve sedated for 2 days while they tended her wound. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of hands touching her shoulder, of bitter medicines being pressed to her lips, of Ronan's voice murmuring beside her bed. Every time she surfaced, he was there, his golden eyes shadowed with exhaustion, his hand wrapped around hers like he was afraid to let go. On the 3rd day, she woke alone. The room was dark, the fire burned down to embers. Neve sat up slowly, wincing at the pull of stitches in her shoulder, and looked around for Ronan. He was not in his usual chair. He was not anywhere. A shadow detached itself from the corner of the room. "Hello, little bride." Neve's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. She had heard it in her nightmares every night for months, the smooth, cultured tones that concealed a monster beneath. Lord Blackthorn stepped into the dim light, and her scream died in her throat. He looked different than he had at the ceremony. His silver hair was matted with dirt, and a fresh scar cut across his cheek where someone had marked him. But his pale eyes were the same, cold and calculating, and the smile that curved his lips made her stomach lurch with terror. "How?" she whispered. "The guards." "Your father was most helpful in providing a distraction." Blackthorn moved closer, and Neve scrambled backward until her spine hit the headboard. "The king is currently defending the eastern wall against what he believes is a second assault. By the time he realizes it was a feint, we will be long gone. He will find me." Neve's voice shook, but she forced the words out. "He will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "Oh, I am counting on it." Blackthorn's smile widened. "You see, I do not simply want to reclaim what is mine. I want to destroy him. I want to take everything he loves and grind it to dust." He reached out and gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "And you, my dear, are everything he loves." He pressed a cloth to her face before she could scream. The world dissolved into darkness, and Neve felt herself falling into nothing. She woke in chains. The room was small and damp, carved from rough stone, with a single barred window too high to reach. Neve's wrists were shackled to the wall behind her, the iron biting into her skin every time she moved. Her shoulder throbbed beneath a crude bandage, and her throat was raw from the drug Blackthorn had used to sedate her. She had no idea where she was. She had no idea how long she had been unconscious. All she knew was that Ronan was not there, and the mate bond inside her chest felt stretched thin, like a thread about to snap. Hours passed, perhaps days. Neve lost track of time in the endless darkness, drifting between waking and sleeping, between despair and desperate hope. She tried to reach for her wolf, tried to summon the strength that had allowed her to shift during the attack, but the iron chains seemed to suppress her power. Her wolf whimpered inside her, too weak to answer. Blackthorn visited her once. He stood in the doorway of her cell, silhouetted against the torchlight, and watched her with those cold, pale eyes. "Your king has received my demands," he said. "His throne, in exchange for your life. If he refuses, I will send you back to him in pieces." "He will never surrender to you." Neve's voice cracked, but she refused to let him see her break. "You do not know him. I know that he loves you." Blackthorn's smile was a razor's edge. "And love makes men weak. He will come for you, alone and desperate, and when he does, I will kill him while you watch. Then I will finally claim what should have been mine from the beginning." He left her alone in the darkness, and Neve finally let herself cry. She wept for Ronan, who was probably tearing the kingdom apart searching for her. She wept for the life they had almost built together, the happiness that had been ripped away before she could fully grasp it. She wept for herself, for the girl who had dared to believe she could escape her fate, only to be dragged back into the nightmare she had fled. The mate bond pulsed weakly in her chest, and she clung to it like a lifeline. He would come for her. She knew he would, but she was terrified of what it would cost him. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone wall and whispered into the darkness. "Find me, Ronan. Please, find me before it is too late." Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and Neve prayed it was not already too late. The howling grew closer. Neve pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear past the pounding of her own heart. More howls joined the first, a chorus of wolves crying out in the darkness. Shouts echoed from somewhere above her, followed by the clash of steel and the unmistakable sounds of battle. He had come. Ronan had found her. The door to her cell exploded inward, torn from its hinges by a force that sent stone dust showering across the floor. A massive wolf stood in the doorway, its fur the color of burnished gold, its eyes blazing like twin suns. Even in wolf form, she knew him. She would know him anywhere. Ronan shifted in a ripple of muscle and bone, striding toward her in human form before the transformation was complete. His face was a mask of fury and desperate relief, and his hands trembled as he reached for the chains binding her wrists. "I am here," he said, his voice cracking. "I am here, Neve. I have you." The chains. She could barely speak through her tears. "They suppress my wolf. I cannot shift." Ronan gripped the iron shackles and pulled. The metal groaned, then shattered, and Neve collapsed into his arms with a sob. He held her against his chest, his face buried in her hair, his entire body shaking with emotion. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "When I came back and found your room empty, the scent of that monster everywhere, I thought—" "I know." She pressed her palm against his cheek, forcing him to look at her. "But you found me. You came. I will always come for you." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Always." A slow clap echoed through the corridor. Ronan spun, pushing Neve behind him as Blackthorn emerged from the shadows. He was flanked by a dozen armed men, and the smile on his face was the cold grin of a predator who believed he had already won. "How touching," Blackthorn drawled. "The mighty Alpha King, brought to his knees by love. Your father would be ashamed, Ronan. He would never have been so foolish." "My father would have killed you the moment he learned what you did to those women." Ronan's voice was deadly calm. "I intend to finish what he would have started." "With what army?" Blackthorn gestured to the men surrounding them. "Your wolves are scattered throughout the fortress, fighting my soldiers. You came for your precious mate, just as I knew you would. Alone, desperate, exactly where I want you." Ronan shifted his weight, preparing to attack, but Neve gripped his arm. She could feel her wolf stirring inside her, stronger now that the chains were gone. The iron had suppressed her, but it had not broken her. She was still a wolf. She was still a mate, and she was done being the helpless prize that men fought over. "He is not alone," she said. Blackthorn's eyes flickered to her, dismissive. "You? The little runaway bride who cannot even shift without—" Neve shifted. The transformation came easier this time, her wolf surging forward with a snarl of pure fury. She was smaller than Ronan, leaner, but her silver-white fur bristled with a rage that made even Blackthorn's men step backward. She lunged before anyone could react, her jaws closing around the arm of the nearest soldier, and the taste of blood flooded her mouth. Ronan shifted beside her, and together they tore through Blackthorn's guards like a storm through wheat. She moved on instinct, ducking under blades and slashing with claws that seemed sharper than they had any right to be. Every enemy she felled was a year of helplessness avenged. Every snarl that ripped from her throat was a declaration that she would never be a victim again. When the last soldier fell, only Blackthorn remained. He stood with his back against the wall, his pale eyes wide with something Neve had never seen on his face before. Fear. The monster who had murdered 3 wives and tried to claim a 4th was finally afraid. "Please," he gasped as Ronan stalked toward him. "I can offer you gold, territory, anything you want. Just let me live." Ronan shifted back to human form, and his golden eyes were cold as death. "You took my mate from my own palace. You chained her in the darkness. You threatened to send her back to me in pieces." He reached out and gripped Blackthorn by the throat, lifting him off his feet. "There is nothing you can offer me that will save your life." Neve shifted beside him, naked and bloodied and more powerful than she had ever felt. "Wait." Ronan paused, his grip on Blackthorn's throat still iron tight. Neve stepped forward and met Blackthorn's terrified gaze. "I want him to know something before he dies. I want him to know that he never owned me, not when my father sold me, not when he stood at that altar, not when he chained me in that cell. I was never his. I was always my own." She smiled, and the expression was sharp as a blade. And now I am choosing to end him. She nodded to Ronan. The crack of Blackthorn's neck echoed through the corridor, and the monster finally stopped breathing. Neve sagged against Ronan's chest, exhausted beyond measure but burning with triumph. It was over. It was finally over. They returned to the palace 3 days later. Neve rode beside Ronan at the head of the column, wrapped in a cloak of midnight blue that bore the royal crest. The wound on her shoulder had been tended by the army's healers, and though it still ached when she moved, she refused to show any weakness. She was no longer the trembling bride who had fled her own ceremony. She was a wolf who had killed to protect her mate, and she would not let anyone forget it. The palace staff lined the entrance courtyard, their faces a mixture of relief and awe as their king and his mate rode through the gates. Petra was waiting on the steps, tears streaming down her cheeks, and she rushed forward to embrace Neve the moment she dismounted. "I thought you were gone," Petra whispered. "I thought we had lost you." "You cannot get rid of me that easily." Neve hugged her back, surprised by how much the simple gesture meant to her. She had never had friends before coming here. She had never had anyone who cared whether she lived or died. The trial was held that afternoon. Lord Ashford knelt in chains before the assembled court, his fine clothes reduced to rags after weeks of imprisonment. He had been captured during the battle at the palace, caught trying to flee once it became clear that Blackthorn's assault had failed. Now he looked up at his daughter with hollow eyes, and Neve felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Lord Ashford," Ronan said, his voice carrying through the silent hall, "you are charged with treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and the attempted assassination of your queen. You provided aid and information to Lord Blackthorn, facilitated his attack on this palace, and directly contributed to the kidnapping of Lady Neve. How do you answer these charges?" Her father's lip curled. "She is no queen. She is a worthless girl I should have drowned at birth." Neve stepped forward, and the court fell even more silent. She looked down at the man who had sold her, beaten her, conspired to have her killed. The man who was supposed to have protected her, loved her, cherished her. "You are wrong," she said quietly. "I am not worthless. I never was. You simply could not see my value because you were too blind, too greedy, too twisted by your own ambition." She lifted her chin. "I am Neve Valamont, mate to the Alpha King, and I am more than you will ever understand." Her father's face contorted with rage, but before he could speak, Ronan raised his hand. "The sentence is death," Ronan declared, "to be carried out at dawn." The guards dragged Lord Ashford away, and Neve watched him go without a flicker of remorse. He had made his choices. Now he would face the consequences. When the hall had emptied, Ronan took her hand and led her through the corridors to the Moonlight Grove. The gardens had been damaged in the fire, but crews had already begun the restoration. New saplings had been planted where the ancient oaks once stood, and fresh moonflowers were beginning to bloom along the water's edge. "I had them work through the night," Ronan said, guiding her to the stone bench where they had shared their first kiss. "I wanted this place restored for you. For us." Neve's throat tightened. "Ronan, you did not have to—" "Yes, I did." He turned to face her, and the look in his golden eyes made her heart stutter. "This is where I first told you about my parents. This is where I realized I was falling in love with you. I could not let Blackthorn destroy it." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. Neve's breath caught as he sank to one knee before her, the moonlight catching the gold of his eyes and turning them to liquid fire. "Neve," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When I found you in that corridor, running from your own ceremony, I thought I was saving a stranger. I had no idea that I was finding the other half of my soul." He opened the box, revealing a ring of white gold set with a moonstone that glowed like captured starlight. "You have changed everything. You have shown me what it means to be brave, to fight for what matters, to love without reservation. I do not want to spend another day without you by my side." Tears streamed down Neve's face. She had spent so long believing she was worthless that no one would ever want her for anything except what she could provide. And here was a king, the most powerful wolf in the realm, kneeling at her feet and asking her to be his. "I love you," Ronan continued. "I love your fire and your courage and the way you refuse to give up, no matter how many times the world tries to break you. Will you marry me, Neve? Not because I claimed you in a ceremony hall, but because you choose me? Because you want this life as much as I do?" Neve sank to her knees before him, cupping his face in her hands. "I tried to escape my ceremony," she said, laughing through her tears. "I ran through corridors in bare feet, desperate to find a way out, and instead I ran straight into you." She pressed her forehead to his. "Yes, Ronan, 1,000 times yes. I choose you. I will always choose you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and the moonflowers glowed around them like a blessing from the goddess herself. She had tried to escape one fate and found another, and this one she would hold on to forever. 1 year later, Neve stood at the altar where she had once been meant to marry a monster. Her father's estate had been seized by the crown after his execution, and Ronan had given it to her as a wedding gift. She had not known what to do with it at first. The halls held so many painful memories, so many ghosts of the girl she used to be. But over the months, she had transformed it into something new. The cold stone corridors were now filled with warmth and light. The rooms that had once been her prison now housed orphaned children from across the realm, wolves who had lost their families and needed a place to belong. She called it Alara House, in honor of the sister Ronan had lost. Today, though, the great hall had been transformed for a different purpose. Garlands of moonflowers hung from the rafters, and hundreds of candles cast a golden glow across the assembled guests. The same nobles who had once watched her father try to sell her now stood in respectful silence as she walked down the aisle on her own 2 feet, wearing a gown of silver silk that matched her wolf. Ronan waited for her at the altar, dressed in black and gold, his eyes shining with a love so fierce it stole her breath. He had wanted to carry her down the aisle, had wanted to declare to everyone that she was his from the very first step. But Neve had insisted on walking alone. She had run from her last ceremony. This time she would walk toward her future with her head held high. When she reached him, Ronan took her hands in his and smiled. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "You say that every day, and I will say it every day for the rest of our lives." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Are you ready?" Neve looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people who had become her family over the past year. Petra stood in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The palace staff who had welcomed her when she was a frightened stranger. The wolves from Ronan's pack who had accepted her as their queen without hesitation. And in the very back, almost hidden in the shadows, she caught a glimpse of a young woman with haunted eyes and bare feet, watching the ceremony with desperate hope. A runaway, perhaps. Someone fleeing a fate she had not chosen. Neve made a mental note to find her after the ceremony, to offer her the same chance Ronan had given her. "I am ready," she said. The ceremony was everything her first one should have been. Words of love and commitment, spoken freely and without coercion. A bond sealed not by contracts and gold, but by choice. When Ronan kissed her, the crowd erupted into cheers, and Neve felt her wolf howl with joy inside her chest. That night, after the feast had ended and the guests had departed, Neve led Ronan to the moonlight grove they had planted in the estate's gardens. New moonflowers bloomed along the water's edge, their petals glowing silver in the darkness. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hands in hers. Ronan's brow furrowed with concern. What is it? Neve guided his palm to rest against her stomach, still flat but carrying a secret she had been holding close for weeks. We are going to have a pup, she whispered. A family of our own. The look on Ronan's face was worth every moment of pain she had ever endured. Wonder and joy and a love so overwhelming it brought tears to his golden eyes. He dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead against her belly, his shoulders shaking with silent emotion. Thank you, he breathed against her skin. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving me everything I never dared to hope for. Neve ran her fingers through his hair and smiled through her own tears. Thank you for blocking that door. He laughed, the sound bright and free, and rose to kiss her beneath the moonlight. She had tried to escape her ceremony, terrified of the fate that awaited her. Instead, she had run straight into the arms of the man she was always meant to find. And she had never stopped running toward him since.